It's Life as We Live It on Radio Cardiff.
Good afternoon, Cardiff. This is Rabya and you are tuned in to Day by Day. Well, it's Monday, the 14th of November today, and as I promised, we will have a very, very special week for you. The subject is very, very sensitive. At the same time, we have to face it. Very informative. But before that, how are you guys doing? I'm hoping that you're well. I'm hoping you're enjoying the weather. You are enjoying the weather. I'm going too fast today, isn't it? You can tell that I'm excited. I'm a bit anxious about it. Here it's a bit cloudy in Cardiff. I hope wherever you are, the sun is shining, and even if it's not, just enjoy. If you want to get in touch with me, you have my email address, Rabya@Radio Cardiff, or simply tweet us at Radio Cardiff. We have our guest today, Victoria Leonard. She knows everything, and she's going to be talking about parental alienation. The subject is, again, very sensitive. Just to give you a little definition, that it's a strategy whereby one parent intentionally displays to the child unjustified negativity aimed at the other parent. The purpose of this strategy is to damage the child's relationship with the other parent and to turn the child's emotions against that other parent. Sad, isn't it? Cardiff, stay tuned. Victoria is up next, and she's going to be talking about it. Today is obviously part one. We're going to be talking to her about what are we going to talk about? Well, the effects, long-term impact, the alienation that causes. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and speak to her.
Day by Day with Rabya Wahid. It's Life as We Live It on Radio Cardiff.
Okay, I'm back. If you just tuned in, this is your host, Rabya coming at you straight from 98.7 FM. Victoria is on the phone with me. Victoria, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you, Rabya?
I'm okay. I've been fumbling throughout the intro, you know. It's very unusual. I've been doing this since I was a child. Not literally, if you know what I mean. But I couldn't get through the intro. I'm anxious. I'm nervous. It's a very sensitive subject, but I really don't care. I mean, I know my listeners feel the same, and whoever is going through alienation. But I'm going to stop talking and let you talk. I know that it's part one of our special edition, which is going to go throughout the week. And today we're going to be talking about it, the impact, isn't it?
Yes. So the impact of long-term alienation and what it looks like and how it feels to be raised as an alienated child.
The mic is all yours, Victoria. The mic is all yours.
Thank you very much. I just quickly, before, if there's the green Martian in the room that is wondering, what is alienation? Are they talking about something from outer space? I want anyone that doesn't understand it to be made aware that they probably have been, or their children have been impacted by the ramifications of alienation. And for anyone that, goes on Google, as we do, and looks at Wikipedia, parental alienation is a theorized process through which a child becomes estranged from one parent as a result of the psychological manipulation of another parent. The child's estrangement may manifest itself as fear, disrespect, or hostility towards the distant parent and may extend to additional relatives or parties. Now, this is a very loose description. And this is something that I obviously want to highlight because
Yes.
myself and other people have worked tirelessly to redefine alienation in its terms. And to do that, we've kind of had to work backwards, which is why, even though normally you'd look at long-term impacts being the end one, I really want to hard hit home the psychological and long-term harm of alienation to children, and also just to define it so that people that think that, oh, that doesn't apply to me because my child still likes me, I want to explain some of the alienating behaviours that can happen, and also not to be too dismal on it and put everything in a negative spin, of the positive ways that you can support an alienated child and or person or adult. So it's a real minefield because it's not recognised as widely as it should be, even though there are countless studies globally that have been done.
Yes.
The reason why we don't recognise it as a psychological abuse is because it's like many things with diagnosis. It's very difficult to pinpoint from adverse childhood effects where and when the separation or the divorce of two parties affects the child. Now, in the past, people used to say, oh, well, the divorce affected the child. And there wasn't ever any, as I've spoken about inverted narratives, there wasn't anyone looking at how those impacts and what were those impacts. For example, negative talk. Oh, your mum does this, your dad does that.
Yes.
And children have a phenomenal survival system. And that is that whoever the caregiver is to them, it's a bit like don't bite the hand that feeds you. They play and act a role. And this can mean as one parent shuns the other parent through the divorce process, so do the children. And the long-term psychological abuse of making a child believe it's made those decisions of its own fruition can lead to long-term attachment disorders. And this is where I want to draw on what it's like for an alienated child, because I think everyone forgets, mothers and fathers, they're there at conception, funnily enough, but they are needed, they're wanted.
Exactly.
For the psychological input, development, and also the adults we're shaping. So it's not really a coincidence that as we exceed millions of alienated children registered in the UK, we are also seeing a bigger uptake in teenagers who are committing crimes, drugs, gangs, exposure to underage pregnancy, and all of these bad relationship choices from what seem fairly educated, parents. And how does this happen? And sadly, a lot of parents negate to notice it's because of them directly. The choice not to work with the other party, the choice to cut them out as if they're a cancer, and what that impacts the child. And I'm going to explain it as this, that each person is made up of two halves of DNA, whether or not your attributes are more to one parent or the other. With those two halves of DNA come whole family units, ancestry, years of culture, tradition. And when you separate, alienate, or sever, you are basically chopping your child in half and hoping that it can future survive. So you're disabling your child. Now, in an emotional impact in terms, you can't physically see a cut in half child. You see what seems like a protective parent wandering around saying, oh, well, the father's useless. Oh, well, the mother's useless. I've had to do this. I have to sever contact. This is phenomenally untrue. It's long-term impacting and damaging, and it allows this false narrative, which is often backed, which I'm going to talk about briefly now, by the social services and local authorities. Now, most of us, Rabya, you and I included, that are alienated parents have had involvement with social services, CAFCAS, or any services that work with children directly as an umbrella of the family courts. And this is the same in Scotland, Wales, Ireland. It's the same everywhere. When we are dealing with these professionals, sadly, they aren't child-centred. They have a tick box mechanism, which means they have to look at the immediate impacts to the child and their immediate safety, especially on the Section 47, and they actually negate heavily long-term impacts.
Dare I interrupt you there? And they also, according to my observation, they have to pick a parent. They have to choose one side.
Yes.
Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. This is true. So resident parents, 9 times out of 10, they say an old adage is possession is 9/10 of the law. This works the same in a closed family court. An accusatory, mudslinging parent within the family court process will often display narcissistic behaviours, are really loved by local authorities.
Yes.
A selfless parent is seen as weak, not having boundaries, and not a protective parent, which completely, again, this is inverted narrative, it completely turns situations such as domestic abuse, coercive control, into a minefield. Now, obviously, Women's Aid, Refuge, and other places deal with parental alienation because you have women that go to these refuges, flee with their children. They then sever contact for the immediate safety of themselves and their children. It is then deemed in a family court process, despite having gone through the correct, everything correctly, citing it correctly, that this is a non-safeguarding parent, and they will give full custody, sometimes without contact, to the perpetrator of the domestic abuse. Because the argument is, well, the domestic abuser didn't abuse the children, it abused the other party. Now, this is dangerous because this is rewarding abusers, whether that's male or whether that's female. And it's something we all have to be very aware of, that if we are saying domestic abuse is bad, then when we grant full custody with no contact to the perpetrators of domestic abuse, we're actually telling children domestic abuse is okay. And this is actually echoed in the statistics. Now, 46% of men in 2021 were recorded as being domestically abused. This is an increase of nearly 30% in the past 5 years. But why would we care about the domestic abuse of men? We've never cared about the domestic abuse of women, and we've never cared about the domestic abuse and its impacts of children until 2021 with the Domestic Abuse Act, which sees that Section 53 says the local authority have a duty of care, and Section 68 discusses coercive control and the manipulation of third parties. Now, it's all very well and good, Rabya, you know about all these wonderful things happening and all this, but if the services that we use are still stuck in 1953, we are at a sad stumbling block.
We are.
And you know, I've often have people that come to me for support, and they talk about, oh yeah, but once this court case is over, you know, the child will go back to normal. 5 years down the line, we have CAM's involvement. We have, sadly, some of the effects affecting young children and young people, especially with mental health disorders surrounding divorce and acrimonious situations, is that you don't understand the impact at that time when that child is in what we call survival mode. The effect will 9 times out of 10 go unnoticed by professionals and be a much bigger causation. And I'm talking things like self-harm, anxiety and panic disorders affecting education. You know, we're seeing an increase in bulimia and anorexia nervosa.
I'm gonna interrupt you there, and please forgive me for this. Whatever you just mentioned, 110%. But what would you say for the children? Because we're talking about, you know, what it what it looks and feels like to be raised an alienated child. Now, I have a case. The children have been separated from their mother. They were cleansed of their mother for 3 months to start with, and they've always lived with their mother. And long story short, they're doing absolutely fine. And I'm putting in inverted commas because the school's saying they're doing absolutely amazing. They do not want to do anything with their mother, even though obviously we're not going to go into details. It's a private case. But they're doing absolutely fine. They're showing no signs of distress, no self-harm, no bulimia, no anorexia. They're doing all the sports in the world. They're doing amazing. They've got all, you have a set system in the UK, so they're in A's and everything. What would you say about those specific two children?
This makes me laugh, Rabya, because
but this is the truth. Honestly, this is what's happening on the outset.
I believe you. I read a health visitors report the other day that echoed the same kind of thing. When you sit with the children and you see that the things they're doing is they think if they behave exceptionally well, then the adults around them will make the best decisions for them. And let's be real about this. It makes me laugh that any adult working in child services or even in a school can't see the long-term impact even on an A-star child. I was an alienated child, Rabya, and I was exceptionally gifted when it came to the fact that my home life wasn't reflected in my grades. I was an A-star student. I loved school. I thrived school. You wouldn't have known any of the domestic abuse that I was subject to, or any of the child abuse that happened in my home, because my school was my safe place. And we need to start looking at A-star students for the same reason. And I've had a lot of very clever kids that have come through the care system say the same thing. I never messed up in school because it was the one place where I had control and I could be good. Wow. And this is the thing, is that I felt punished and starved of 50% of my family, of my life, of my connection. And I'm an adult. I'm 37 years old. And I now look to all these young children that even say things like, I don't want to see my daddy. Why? Because he's horrible. When was the last time you saw him? What was horrible about the last contact? Oh, no, we had loads of fun, blah, 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 blah. Where does a child, we've all seen, children are lovers, not haters. Yeah. They don't put these words in their mouths. These are things and situations. Now, quite rightly, I have had children that have said, sadly, I saw mummy or daddy physically abuse. The other one hit them is normally the expression that children will use. And therefore, I'm scared. Well, that's brilliant, because you now have a point of reference, a point of communication between child and parent, because parents have to be accountable for their actions. Has that parent sat down and said, I'm really sorry for the way I behaved? Not just to the child, but to the other party. As well, yeah. And this is where we all have to become accountable. So when you talk about, A-star kids, they make me want to cry more than anyone, because those are the lost children that child support workers are going, well, the kids are fine. It's an easy job for them. And those are the children that long-term are going to have issues with attachments, are going to fall in love really hard and become so fiercely loyal they'll have no boundaries. Hello, hand up over here. So these are things that not having both your parents, longing for a parent, can impact your choices in men, women, and the way that you could potentially parent in the future. So parental alienation is not just messing up 1 or 2 generations. Absolutely. You're cursing 7 generations. So you're cursing your own grandchildren with the impact. And, the saddest thing is, right, those A-star kids, those kids that are doing their SATs and doing really well, they'll probably get through secondary school and then they'll hit what we call the emotional wall at the end of hormones and growth, where they don't have the other party. Sometimes if they're raised by men, then they've gone through puberty without that female that is their mother, that is that connection that makes them feel comfortable, and vice versa for boys. But also, it's the importance of cross-sex integration, is that daughters need fathers and sons need mothers. Yes. And when we negate the importance of either gender, we are harming the gender and identity of our own children. And it's got nothing to do with, some people might draw on it as Freudian, but it's basically rounding off at a young age with safe people that they can connect with on an emotional level to teach them about positive relationships and boundaries. And if a relationship to a child signifies harm and divorces, for anyone that's at home that wants to kind of read up on this, there's PubMed is a website that I often use for medical experts and advice. And there's an abstract on there from a study that raises very interesting issues regarding to criminology in contrast to family situations, but also the bloodbath. This is how it's described around separation and divorce. Oh, God. These are, and how they're now being termed in psychological terms, when doctors speak about this kind of thing and the impact on children, is pathological divorces. Yes. So, and it's every psychiatric expert has to look at this on case-by-case basis. And if the professionals are not trained to look at the long-term impact that severing their cultural identity has, whether that's with a man or whether that's a woman, then they are too assisting with harm. And I know we don't have terribly long, but that's where I want to draw on. I know there's a lot of people out there, who are going, but what's it going to look like for my child in their 20s and 30s? well, as I said, they will struggle with relationships.
Sadly, it's the truth, and you cannot sugarcoat it. That is the
No.
thing. They will struggle. Yes.
They will have anxiety disorders. They will have attachment disorders. Attachment disorders through alienation are pretty much a guarantee. Borderline personality traits. It's been signified that alienated children in an anomaly study done recently for people below the age of 25 diagnosed with bipolar
My God.
disorder and or borderline personality disorder, they have been alienated children.
Wow.
So what are the psychological impacts? How does it look for your child in 10 years' time? Abysmal. Who is to blame? You, if you were the one that said you were this protective parent. And what can you do to make sure you're not this person?
Yes,
Will
please.
you encourage and allow contact? You found this person attractive. It may have been a moment of madness. It may have been 10 years of marriage. Go back to that point of attractiveness, what you liked in them, and explore and, expunge on that. Develop a relationship with your children where your ex-partner is not the offensive. They are part of the family. Allow pictures of the alienated party. Now, sometimes it can be estrangement, and this is why I'm trying to push for these new definitions. And the definitions I want are, alienation in its normal term that we've just described, that everyone talks about, the psychological abuse and the turning of one parent against another. I also want to talk about financial alienation, where one party doesn't pay for the child and therefore they sever contact. Totally wrong. I also, want it to be known that there's alienation from and to do with the services. And that's because, the services are parenting more and more of our children. Yes. And they are massive, massive, massive alienators themselves. Social services are the worst at upholding contact and supporting regular contact. So we need to collectively start going, right, okay, we know that this is causing attachment disorders in adults. We know it's increasing drug intake. We know that it's pretty much a guarantee that they're going to have anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. And if this is the saddest thing, if domestic abuse is being cited and the perpetrator parent wins, then there is a high chance that those children, if it's not addressed through counselling, will become perpetrators of domestic abuse themselves.
Yes. They'll mirror the behavior. I do want to add that social services, and I know we're very bravely talking about it, and it's going all around the world. They need educating, not just 9-to-5 job and workload, and the like you said from 1958, and I say it sarcastically 1901, but they need to be educated. They need to be fully informed that how not to fall for the charms of a narcissist or a perpetrator, and not to just side with one parent. And I'm hoping to God one day that'll happen, because otherwise they'll keep doing what they're doing, very minimal work, and follow the old rules, and sadly destroying more lives. And when I say destroying more lives, I'm talking about alienated children, and their future.
Yeah. Well, what we should do as social workers, child-led supporters and workers is actually focus on the long-term best interest in the child, and we should risk assess. Now, as someone that's obsessed with risk assessment, one thing I will say is you cannot assess risk if you're not going to take risk. And the social services have become too good at, for want of a better term, covering their backsides in terms of legality, because most of these issues arise during the family court process and or public law, if the social services are involved. As you know, Rabya, as I know, you can go to a social worker who you would think is paid to have your children's best interests at heart, but sometimes they're not even a parent. Sometimes their manager says, no, it's not of interest to us. Why? Because the risk assessment has named one party a danger and the other one's safe.
Yeah, again, siding. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is actually what they should do is go, what makes that party dangerous? And how in the best interest of the children can we make them safe? And that's as simple as it is. If in a 6-month assessment timeframe they got parents into rehab, if they supported them through the separation or domestic abuse, if they actually got them enrolled in courses such as Triple P to allow open communication, to allow non-hostility, and they encourage parents to attend meetings together whilst going through mediation, then I would say they're going far enough. They have the resources, they have the money, and they have the staff. It is abysmal how they treat alienated parents. And quite frankly, it does actually go a long way to support the hostilities that the general public feel towards social workers. Absolutely. And it's been my biggest argument. I can see why people despise social workers when they're alienated from their child. We've got all this legislation talking about parental rights. And as you and I both know, parental rights don't exist.
Victoria, it's 13:29, and as much as I want to continue, we will continue tomorrow. I think we need to do a whole month of parental alienation, but for now, before you go, I know tomorrow we'll be talking about the family court and how to navigate alienation during the court process. But before you go, do you have a message? Because we're at the end of our program, but not to forget, listeners, tune in tomorrow at 1 o'clock, because Victoria will be continuing parental alienation tomorrow, the subject of parental alienation. Before you go, Victoria, any message?
Yes, don't ever give up, and you are loved, you are wanted, and you are lovable.
Thank you so much for abruptly finishing your interview, but it's 13:30, and I cannot thank you enough, and for all the listeners for listening to Victoria. I will speak to you tomorrow, Victoria. Until then, take very good care of yourselves.
Same to you, Rabya. Good afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. All right, listeners, that was Victoria Leonard, and I know it's 1:30. I'm supposed to be finishing my show, but do not forget to tune in tomorrow, Day by Day, with your host, Rabya Abdulwahid, at 1 p.m. Victoria will be talking about the family court next and how to navigate alienation during the court process. I'm just going to simply say goodbye and leave you with Victoria's message: never, ever give up. Says it all. Take care.
Day by Day with Rabya Wahid. It's life as we live it on Radio Cardiff.